Welcome to Untethering Shame, the podcast where we unravel the complex emotions that keep us bound and explore pathways to liberation. I'm your host, Kyira Wackett, and today we're delving into a topic that affects many of us, our relationship with food, shame, and the journey towards intuitive eating. Joining me is Lara Days, a beacon of light in the realm of holistic health and wellness. Lara is a certified intuitive eating counselor, yoga instructor, master health coach, and sports nutritionist. Her mission? To dismantle the toxic grip of the diet industry and empower individuals to reclaim their joy and confidence in their bodies. Lara's approach goes beyond the surface. It's about unlearning the damaging narratives we've internalized, rewiring our mindset, and embracing our body's innate wisdom. It's about food freedom, ditching diet culture, and stepping boldly into our power. Today, Lara and I will explore the insidious nature of shame surrounding food, the pitfalls of all or nothing thinking, and how we can reshape our perceptions to honor our bodies and cultivate holistic health. So as my 4-year-old would say, let's get cozy and settle in and prepare to untether ourselves from shame as we embark on this transformative journey towards self-compassion, empowerment, and liberation. Lara, welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you.
I'm excited too. I'm going to go back and steal that intro because it was amazing. I'm tearing up over here.
I joked about this early on because it became the thing that I would write these intros. And when I first started the podcast, I was like, I'm going to only record the people I know just to start off. Because I'm like, you know what? I'll get started with this, just like find my flow. And I was writing these intros and people are like, oh my goodness. And then I realized it's like my form of a love language because I love to say things that feel really true in my heart, but people don't like to hear it. They don't want to be complimented. Like they do, but they don't. Like they're so uncomfortable. There's this like visceral reaction where they're like, no, it's fine. And they move on. But you can't talk while I'm doing my intro because you would mess up the whole episode. So you have to sit there and listen to it. And I love it. And it's like, even now, like getting the chance to, we've only met one other time, but I felt so drawn to you right away. And like we were on such a same, like we had a vibe with that. And it's like, gosh, this person's heart is so open. And like the reality that you want to create for people is just so real. And I wanted to name that. So I'm glad that it felt true for you as it did for me as I was writing it.
Yeah, I'm all warm and fuzzy now.
Well, that's going to lead us well into my initial sort of intro question. And I love hearing this. I know you're chatting a little bit offline about when we're recording versus, maybe when it gets aired. But I love to do just one word to describe how you're feeling right now. And you can tell us why or why not, depending on what the word is.
Anxious.
Uh-huh.
Not because of this podcast recording. I'm very excited for the podcast recording. But as soon as we finish, this is the night that Iowa takes on LSU in the Elite Eight to go to the women's Final Four. And I'm having a lot of feelings about it.
So, what is like the biggest, is it just like, I just don't want them to lose, or is there something more specific about it?
So for people listening who are like, why is this a big deal? So Last year, Iowa and LSU played in the championship game for the title. And LSU won last year. And Iowa currently has arguably the best college basketball player of all time. I am born and raised in Iowa City, Iowa. So we have this ridiculous saying, I bleed black and gold. I don't actually, that would be concerning, but I've been a Hawkeye literally since I came out of the womb. Yeah. So I don't know that we've won a championship, certainly not in my lifetime. So It just feels like a really big deal.
Yeah. I never really got into watching sports as a kid. And then I played them in high school, played like intramural stuff in college, nothing like professional or like college level or anything. But I got into them and I liked playing, but I still wasn't a big fan of watching. And then we're from Milwaukee originally, or I'm from Milwaukee. My husband's from Oregon, Wisconsin. But we became like big Bucks fans. And to the point where like if he's working a shift in the emergency department, I'm still watching the game, which is like I was never that way. And I'm like, we were watching one the other night. So now having a 4-year-old and being like super mindful of screen time, we record them and then watch them after she goes to bed so that she's not like sitting in front of the TV 3 nights a week watching something she doesn't really care about. While I'm also telling her that she doesn't get to watch her stuff 3 times a week. But we're like sitting there watching it and the game is just like, I mean, back and forth. You don't know who's going to win. Like it feels, and I was like, this is not a good move before bed. Like I could just feel, I was like, I am having so many chemicals dumped in my body right now. Like I cannot relax. So it's crazy when you really develop a relationship, even if it's not direct, but like with the team, with the community, that like it's intense. It's really big in your body.
Super intense. So
well, here's hoping that when you listen to this in a few months, you're going, and now I know they won. So we'll just like preemptively assume you're going to be listening to this. They won, and or it was the best game of basketball that you've gotten to watch in years.
I mean, that honestly, I think might be true regardless of who wins.
Okay.
So it's going to be great. There's another game after that's like 2 of the other best players, USC and UConn. Like it's just a night full of women's sports, which also as a former collegiate women's athlete who like no one, it was D3, but no one cared. No one came to the games. Like seeing this blow up is just, it's great.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Okay. So we could obviously talk about basketball the rest of this time. Mostly I'd have nothing to say about anything other than like really the Bucks and the players that I really dislike on the other teams. Some of them, because I think as a mental health therapist, I'm like, I'm getting some feels that they just might be like shitty at communicating and not the kindest people. But usually it's like, no, they're good and I don't like it and I don't want that. So that'd be a whole separate podcast. Maybe round 2 on my next podcast. We'll come on and we'll talk basketball. Yeah.
Basketball.
For both of us, though, I think coming into this conversation, you know, we've both been in the eating disorder world and like working with people around body image, all this stuff for a really long time. And those words, those concepts become the same as somebody else being like, there's clouds outside. Like it feels second nature to talk about things like intuitive eating or sort of anti-diet culture, those things. But I honestly think most people don't really know what that actually means. They've heard the terms, they have some general idea. It's the same as me talking about shame. People have heard it. They're all like, oh yeah, Brene Brown. I'm like, then tell me what it is. Not to quiz you, but just like checking in. And they really don't know. And so can you explain to people what intuitive eating is?
Yeah. So I want to preface this by saying to give a detailed, complex definition would be tough, and it would probably be slightly different depending on who you ask. I'm happy to attempt it. I typically do. But on like the most basic level, intuitive eating is eating in the way that is the best for our own unique body. And it does go beyond eating, which I think is like bringing in a little bit more of the nuance and complexity of intuitive eating, which capital I, capital E, intuitive eating is a set of 10 principles that help people be able to do that. Because I think one of the things that happens most frequently is I say, you know, intuitive eating, and people are like, oh, well, I can't eat intuitively because I don't feel my hunger cues, or I can't eat intuitively because XYZ. And I'm like, well, right. Like that's why the framework exists. Like that's why capital I, capital E, intuitive eating was developed, is to help you be able to do the thing being eating and moving and living in the way that is best for your own unique body, as opposed to eating, moving, living in a way that someone else is telling you to do it.
And, or I suppose that perpetuates hustle culture, all the norms. Because as you're saying it, I'm thinking about, you know, when you're like, well, it's not just what we eat. I'm like, well, sure, because it's people that are not taking breaks when they need to take breaks. They are not feeling their feelings when their body is giving them that cue of like, there's something going on here. They're not sleeping. They're not moving. And so all of those signals are being ignored, are being dismissed, are being avoided to further whatever the goal is. Again, for many people, I think it is that pressure to be doing all the time, to be performing, to be, you know, they're skipping their lunch breaks. They're not going to bed until 3-4 hours after their body's asking them to. So then when they're like, well, yeah, I don't feel my hunger and fullness cues, or sometimes I feel like I've been eating and I don't know when to stop. It's like, well, Yeah, because you can't self-select to, like, only have that one channel on. You basically have been telling your body, "I don't give a shit about you and what you want or need, but now I need you to tell me when you're full so I don't overeat because I'm too afraid that I'm gonna get fat or I'm overeating," or whatever other
Whatever
thought
the
that you have.
fear is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting. And so I think we're already sort of answering the second question, but my biggest thing I'm curious about is from your perspective, why are we so bad at this thing that feels like it should be so natural? Because basically what you're saying is how to listen and take care of your body. And yet, I mean, I don't think you and I are ever going to get to a place we don't have a job. Like people are always going to want to talk about this. Like, why is it so hard for us?
Yeah. I think it's twofold. I think there's a physiological reason and a psychological reason. So the physiological reason, and of course they overlap. So
Hmm.
like these are not two separate things, they overlap. But physiologically, we are not feeling our hunger cues and fullness cues and feelings because of exactly what you were just saying. We are working through our lunch break, we're hustling, we're telling our body not now, I'm busy, whether it's we need to sleep, we need to eat, we need to move our body, we need to wake up, we need to stop eating, whatever it is. I
Hmm.
need to stop and feel my feelings. Like we're telling our body, no, not right now, I don't have time. And so our body's signals are literally like going haywire because if we're not sleeping enough, we are not producing enough hunger and fullness hormones, leptin and ghrelin, which impacts whether or not we're able to feel our hunger and fullness. Like
Hmm.
in addition to the distraction, right? So like also, this is like a pretty juvenile way of thinking about it, but it usually makes sense to people. If we have ignored our hunger cues for whatever reason, whether it is an eating disorder, whether it is dieting, whether it is just working through our lunch breaks, I think of this as like your body at first is giving you those cues. Like someone's yelling at you, like,
Hmm.
hey, Kyira, hey, and you're ignoring them. They can only yell for so long until they lose their voice, right?
Right.
Like eventually they're going to stop yelling at you. They're going to be like, well, she's not paying attention, or now my voice is gone, or whatever it is. The same thing happens with our hunger cues. If you're ignoring them, first of all, your body's going to be like, well, that's wasted energy. Second of all,
Hmm.
if you're not getting enough food, your body's going to start doing what it needs to do to stay alive instead of giving you silly little hunger cues. That's
Right.
going to force a binge instead. And like we can get into all those other physiological things that happen. But the flip side of this, and this is the part that no one wants to talk about, is our ingrained fat phobia. Like we
Hmm.
don't want to get fat. And so we psychologically don't trust our bodies to tell us what it needs because we've been trying to control our bodies.
Hmm.
And we believe something about fat people.
Hmm.
And we believe that about ourselves too if we are fat. So, like, that takes a lot of unlearning and a lot of deconditioning and self acceptance and acceptance of
Hmm.
others. And I think the level of cognitive dissonance that's created when we start to try to tell our brains, like, oh, you can actually be fat and healthy. You can actually be fat and lovable and worthy and responsible and rich, like whatever it is that we've been conditioned to believe, that's a really big battle happening in our brains. And so it seems easier to just go get a meal plan
Right.
or count our macros or do whatever, because then we don't have to deal with the physiological, or more importantly, probably for most people, the psychological battle that's going on.
I think that's so important. I remember when I was in my master's program, is it Harvard? It's like the implicit bias test. I don't remember which school it comes from.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's
I
Harvard.
think it is Harvard.
And, I'm self-selecting at this point to tell everyone, like, I was in I think it was on my 3rd year. So I did an extra year of training because I wanted to do 2 internships. And this was because I had had a lot of trauma. I had had my own eating disorder. So I was in recovery from my own eating disorder. I fucking hated all the treatment that I had gotten, which was really just a lack of treatment and awareness when I was in that space. And so I was like, I want to be different. I also had enough insight to know, what if I can't separate me from them? And so I wanted to do sort of a quote unquote regular, like a more general mental health internship, and then in one specifically in an eating disorder clinic. And so everybody knows this. Like every class we're in, anytime we're talking about multiculturalism, I was like, we need to talk about fat phobia. If we're talking about race, we need to talk about body size. Like I'm bringing it up all the time. And then we do this implicit bias test, and I'm fucking biased towards fat people. I know this logically. And I'm like, God damn it, I'm gonna be the worst therapist ever. And then I had to pause and be like, or I could do myself and anybody that walks in my room the service of acknowledging how uncomfortable it feels to name that and to realize that's why people, when they're like often in this anti-fat, we were like anti-fat phobia, like we're trying to do all this body positivity work. So much of it is like, I want anybody that's fat to feel lovable, but not me. Like there's still this separation. And I had that. And that's what I had to figure out is I had done so much unlearning in the world. I'm sure there was still like these subliminal messages, but I had never gotten to that point where I applied it to me too. So I could never be in that group of people, which means you're still upholding and perpetuating the bias. And so I think about that. I think about that discomfort for people because the idea of you making that decision to learn to trust your body also means realizing that size, what is and is not considered fat, is subjective, that it changes, that it evolves, and that you actually don't really know what your body's natural set point is and where it wants to be and how it could optimally function. It's for your body to kind of communicate that to you and for you to listen. And that is just like, not only is that fat phobia, but everybody's biggest issue, I feel like, is with control, trying to control the things that they can't for fear of what would happen. So then it's that double-edged sword of what that would mean. And so I don't really have a question. I just am thinking about that and thinking about how like, well, yeah, it's fucking hard because you realize like I never wanted anyone to know. I was like, I can't tell a single person that I'm going to do this work and that that's what I think. And then it's coming into that piece of like, no, I've existed in the exact same culture that you've existed in, and I still have that. And I still have those moments when my body changes where I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope that's not happening. And then you have to pause and be like, what do you need to do to release that as one side is good and one side is bad? And what's the work that you have to continue to show up and do, even though it feels really uncomfortable?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, how fitting for the whole purpose of this work around shame is like, we have to be able to acknowledge that and know that that does not make us a bad person, which is hard. It's really hard. And retweet that like DEI conversations need to include fat people. That makes me really angry. I'm like, yes, anyway, body liberation. Like all bodies need to be liberated.
Yeah. Yeah. And thinking about, I think, again, what does that look like to do the work on a communal level and to do the work on an internal level? And I think that's that piece where it's like, again, I would be like, well, I want to have conversations with you all day about, when I worked in the two parallel clinics, it was really interesting because the couches, the chairs, the setup of my office when I worked in an eating disorder clinic, completely different than the other clinic. There were couches with higher base forms so that if there was somebody in a bigger body, someone with a differently abled body, the leverage point was different. So it allowed for people to sit more comfortably in a chair, having chairs that have no sides and a wider base, allowing for all bodies to be there, even the design of where your tables are at. So somebody doesn't get up and their body takes up space, regardless of who you are, and you want to be invisible and you think that tiny is better, your body still takes up space. And the idea of people sort of designing these like micro room systems. So then somebody gets up, they bump into a table, something falls over, and now their shame comes in. They're like, see, your body doesn't fit here. Your body doesn't belong. And so that part was always interesting to me. And I'm sure as people are listening, they're like, yeah, I want somebody to feel included. And I think they probably do a lot of what I did and what I'm still probably doing and haven't lifted the next level up. Like, I think this is a rest of my lifetime process.
Ongoing.
Yeah.
100%. Yep.
How do they do that? How do they flip it internally? Like, okay, they're over here. They're like, yes, we need to make sure that everybody feels included. We shouldn't be doing Weight Watchers as a team bonding activity in corporate settings anymore. Like, like all these things that should probably shift. But also,
Yeah.
like, I still don't want to be fat. How do they shift that side of it?
Yeah. I think, first of all, there's a certain amount of validation and permission that I just want to give people, because I see the comments on fat influencers
Yeah.
Instagram posts, and like, of course, why would you want to be fat if that's how people
Yes.
are
Right.
treating you? Period. Like, point blank, totally get it. On a more individual level, because that's a societal and systemic problem. So on an individual level, I just like to get really curious and ask questions like, what do I believe will change about me as a person if I
Mm,
am in a fat body? Who told me that being fat was bad? Why do I believe that my being fat is bad? What do I think will happen if I gain weight? And like, really just asking these questions and allowing yourself to answer honestly, which, like, maybe there are some really good reasons in
yeah.
there, and maybe there aren't. And like, that's still really powerful to know either way.
Yeah.
Um, like, I was trying to work through this with a client recently who, her belief, we also have to dig a little bit. Like, her belief when I asked her about her body size was like, well, my friends can wear cuter clothes than I can. And I was like, what is like beneath that? Because I
Mm,
don't think on a surface level, like, my friends can wear cuter clothes than I can. First of all, we can probably, here's another question, is like, ask yourself if that's actually
right.
true. Like, is that true? That's a pretty subjective
Hmm.
question. What makes something cute or not cute? Is it the belief, like, is it a lack of self-esteem
Hmm.
when it comes to, oh, well, I want to wear a crop top, but I quote unquote can't, right? Then it's like, okay, cool. Who told you you
Right.
can't? Why do you think you can't? And just answering these questions and digging and seeing what comes up, because whatever the answers to those questions are, I think are going to lead to the real why for people, which is like usually around self worth, sense of belonging, things that we as humans need.
Hmm.
Like, if we are afraid that if we gain weight, we will not be accepted, our tribe mentality is saying, alert, 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 like, we need to be accepted. So maybe that comes down to talking with your inner circle about it. And like, maybe you just need to hear them say, like, no, dude, we actually like you because you're cool as
Right.
shit. We don't care what you look like, or whatever you need to hear. It's usually self-validation more than validation from others. Because if we think about why we surround ourselves with the people we do, it's probably not because, like, oh, because they're smoking hot, like they have a
Hmm.
smoking hot body, that's why we hang out.
Right.
Like, we never say that about other people, but we believe that that's what other people think about
Right.
us.
Right. And I think a lot of it too is like, so as you're describing, and I'm like, well, right. Basically, what you're saying is to ask all these questions to figure out what's their specific shame story. Because again, it's that there's a
Mhm.
threat to my worth and my ability to connect or belong if this happens. And so, one question I've even asked people before is like, what does fat mean to you? Because sometimes I have this perception that this is like, a certain weight or appearance, but to them, it might even be if I gain 5 pounds, if I gain, if
Mhm.
I'm even at this weight is no longer acceptable in our culture. Or, there's always the messaging that I could be doing more. I mean, they've made it so easy. I can just give myself a shot now and I should be able to be just fine and lose weight. So why I have no excuse not to be in this body that has been, even if we can know logically, it's been told to us as the better body. We have now internalized that belief of like, well, this body is more productive. This body is, again, for a lot of people, I think it's not just attraction physically, but it's people will think I'm lazy. People will think that I am not a hard worker, that I don't care. They make assumptions about me and how I spend my time based on that appearance. And it's no different than if we're talking about, racism, sexism, all these other things, the assumptions that are made. But then it sounds like for you, it's a lot of kind of like the 4 questions from Byron Katie. Like, well, is that true? Like, is that actually objectively true? And regardless of if it is, who do I become when I believe it to be true? Because do I like that person that spends, I mean, having a daughter was like the best thing that could happen for me to unlearn some of those behaviors because I have never talked about my body in front of her. And I'm like, we are over 4 years now. And like, I've talked about it, but not like in any way ever judgment. Like, I'll talk about the
Sure.
experience of feeling bloated, like, because she'll feel those experiences. Or like, sometimes I'll feel like a swollen feeling, or when I get my period, what does that feel like? And how do I feel different in my body? But really trying to keep it neutral. But the internal dialogue, I want to say, like when I started doing something, like starting working out, and suddenly I had to buy all new clothes, even though I could tell you I knew why that was happening, I'm like, but I'm way more hungry now. So that must mean I'm getting fat because I'm eating more. That's that like resistance to the intuitive eating piece. Well, I'm eating more. So it has to mean that I'm gaining weight. So my weight is going up because I'm getting fat because I'm doing that. And then you're like, I'm getting hot as I'm saying it, right? Like I can feel it. Again, logic me knows that's not true, but it's so hard. It's almost like the horse has like taken 6 laps around the track before you even realize that you've gone there and you're thinking. And I feel like for so many people, if that's that fear and that threat and they're there, it's like they don't even want that to be their reaction, but they don't know how to stop it because it feels like it's such a protective thing to be like, I'm going to get that meal plan. I'm going to get that shot. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to sign up for this new challenge. I'm going to start counting this, or I'm going keto or whatever it is. It's like, I need it to be as quick as possible because I don't have time, not because I'm busy, but someone's going to find out if I don't fix it soon enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of transitioned to where my brain was anyway, a little bit, which is like, at what cost?
Right.
Like at what cost? And I also want to just like remove any shame around people who like truly do want to lose weight and or change their bodies. Like I'm never going to tell someone what to do with their own body, but I am going to ask you at what cost, and is it worth it? Because I think most of most of my clients come to me because they're tired. They're tired of dieting. They're tired of trying to maintain this illusion of control, which it is an illusion because, again, there are psychological and physiological reasons that restriction causes binging and cravings and lack of control. They're tired, but they're physically tired. Their body is exhausted from gaining weight and losing weight and gaining weight and losing weight, which research is telling us now is worse for your body than existing as an obese person. Is the weight cycling, the constant losing and gaining and losing and gaining, and like it's not worth it anymore. And I do think that if we're really attached, it might feel like it's still worth it. And if that's where people are, that's fine. Like there are people who have, and we're seeing it now, as you mentioned, the shots, right? Like there are people who have the means to have a whole training team, meal plan, in-house chef, all of the things. And they're still making a different choice. And like they're allowed to do that. Also a testament to like, well, I won't go down that whole rabbit hole. There are a lot of things that impact body size that are not food and are not working out.
I mean, we can just say all the systems of isms. Like if we talk about racism, socioeconomic status, education, yes, absolutely. We can put that pin there. Encourage you all to take that deeper on your own because like that would be 7 more hours.
Go look up. Yes. Go look up the social determinants of health. Go look up what percentage of our body size is genetic versus changeable, lifestyle based, all the things. Like and that's again, perceived control. We cannot control our body's genetic blueprint. Period. Like at some point, and I use this example with my clients sometimes too. I'm like, what would you say to someone who was like, well, I really need new shoes, but I'm a size 9 and I'm not going to buy new shoes until I'm a size 6.5. You would look at them like they were crazy, but like we do that to our bodies. We'll be like, oh, well, I'm not going to shop until I'm this size. And it's like, what if you're not that size? Like, what do you mean?
Or I'm going to keep these clothes in my closet until I can fit in them again as a reminder that I'm not good enough now. And it sounds to me like a lot of what you're getting at with people is, again, there's nothing wrong with, like, we can use productivity even as another example. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be more productive. The question that we would ask somebody is, what's the intention? What's the driver? If it is that fear of like, I'm not doing enough. I can't set boundaries at work. I can't say no. I can't take a lunch break because everyone's going to think that I'm not working hard enough. We got to tease that that's shame driven. And so if someone's like, well, I really want to lose weight. I want to do this. I want to get all these things done because then I'll feel good. Then I'm lovable. I will be confident then. I will be sexy then. I will be attractive then. Whatever it is, that's shame. But there are people that are like, gosh, I know that I haven't been taking care of my body. I know that food became a way that I was trying to cope with trauma, with unresolved emotions. And I want to figure out how to show up different for my body. And I want to lose weight with that, or I'm aware of those things. And so I think it's really important what you said, that we're not saying gaining weight or losing weight is the issue. What we're saying is that we're driven by this intention that is really on the hook for you're only good enough if you fit into some sort of a box. And then you spend your entire life either chasing to get into that box or afraid you're going to fall out of it. And that is no way to exist on either side. And then we get the yo-yo dieting, but also just the ups and downs in our moods, the changes. I mean, interpersonally, people's relationships are significantly affected. I mean, I even think about the number on the scale when I was in my eating disorder brain would dictate whether or not I would let my husband put his arm around me. And he's a physical touch person for love language. So like I wouldn't touch, and it wasn't like sex. It was like, I won't even let you hold my hand if I don't get quote unquote permission from these numbers. And it could be the scale, it could be the amount of food I ate in a day or what I did. But it's this idea of everything becomes a judgment against ourselves, what we can eat, what we can't, whether we're doing good, doing bad. And so we turn off those natural cues. When you think about that, you think about, you mentioned the 10 principles of like capital I, capital E, intuitive eating. For many people, I think that's really overwhelming, that idea of like doing all this work. Even though it's broken down, there's this idea of kind of like, how do we make those shifts and those changes? But when you think about people getting started in that, they're like, okay, yeah, you've sold me. This is terrible. I hate this. I feel like shit no matter what is happening. I'm constantly telling myself I'm not doing enough. I want to allow the possibility that my body's on my team, and that if I were to listen to it and learn to trust it and it learned to trust me, like we could actually live better, whatever better means. What's step one?
So I have this analogy, and I don't have my jar of marbles, but the analogy is that we have this jar of marbles and it is our self-trust jar. Every marble is one action, one behavior. And we can think about this self-trust, body trust. They're going to be the same thing for the purpose of the conversation. But every time we do something that honors what our body is telling us, marble goes in the jar. Every time that we do something that goes against what our body is telling us, marble comes out of the jar. Now, let me also, before we start making this into another mind game with ourselves about good and bad, no one ever has a perfectly full jar of marbles, right? Like I'm kind of hungry right now. I'm not going to get up and walk away from the podcast recording because I'm hungry right now. You know what I mean? Like there are moments where we just cannot honor exactly our cues right now. Like we're not going to pee our pants on the airplane unless we have no other choice, right? So like no one has a perfectly full jar of marbles, but the point of me bringing this up is like, can you think of just one way to put one marble into your jar today? Maybe that just means, oh, I'm thirsty. I have water. I was going to write another email, but I'm going to take a drink real quick.
I love that.
Cool. I'm going to put a marble in my jar. It could be you're on the couch. It's 9:30. You normally go to bed at 11 and you're like, I actually feel kind of tired. I think I'm going to go upstairs right now. Marble goes in the jar. Anything that you notice your body telling you that you have a habit of ignoring. And honestly, like I'm a big lowest hanging fruit kind of gal. Like, when people tell me that they forget to eat or that mealtime is hard or whatever, they have kids at home, they work a 9 to 5, all the things, like maybe breakfast when you're getting a kid and yourself out the door is not the time to try to sit down and prepare whatever meal you're trying to prepare. Like, don't make it harder than it needs to be.
Yeah.
Like, this, let it be simple. Bring snacks and put them in your drawer at work so that you have them.
Yep.
Then maybe when you're feeling hungry, maybe you're not ready to not work through lunch, but maybe you just grab a granola bar from your drawer. Great. Marble goes in the jar. You honored your hunger.
I love that.
This could also be like, if we're talking about feelings and folks who are kind of on the end of the spectrum where food is a coping mechanism, this could also be just stopping yourself one time and saying, okay, I feel myself really wanting to go to the pantry. I'm going to take a few breaths first. Even if you still go to the pantry, you stopped, you took some breaths, you checked in with yourself, marble goes in your jar.
Right. I love that analogy. I love thinking about, we're not shaming ourselves for how many marbles come out of the jar, because that is also, I think, understanding the context of our lives. I think about, like, I really had to pee. We're in the car. We're 4 minutes from home. I was like, you can hold it. We're almost home. I took a marble out of her jar in that moment. I'm also not a shitty mom. The context of life is we're on a highway and I need to get home. But it is like, then when we get home and she's distracted and she's coloring, it's like, hey, babe, you said you had to pee. Get in there and go to the bathroom and like take care of your body. And so, but it is that piece of, I think, it's interesting watching kids, like when I think about when she was a baby and how like they inherently know, they don't know how to tell us necessarily other than crying, but like they know when they're hungry, they know when they're full. I have a lot of conversations with moms, particularly when I was more in the therapy room, less from the coaching side now, but they had their own eating disorder, maybe active or in remission, or we'll just say disordered eating habits. And they're so worried about their kid and that their kid is going to have those. And so they're doing everything they can to stop them, or they're worried that their kid is eating too much or too little. And I was like, gosh, we actually all inherently do have those cues of when we're hungry and when we're full. They might need a little help making sure that what they're putting on their plate isn't a Pop-Tart every time. But even then, like if they're eating, they're eating. Like we really do need to kind of
fed is best.
Fed is best, and like how to take some of that pressure off. And so I think for many of us, we up the ante too quickly. And so like you thinking about somebody's example, it's like, well, now I need to eat lunch and I need to make sure that my lunch has this many, grams of protein and this much of this and this much of this. And we're like, you are going from not eating at all to now needing to have the most quote unquote nutritious, complete, healthy meal possible. And you're going to take the whole time and eat it. And when are you going to prepare that in your already overtaxed day? Or you're going to go buy that? Oh, in your already overtaxed financial world where you're afraid of money and the world feels like it's getting in. So it's pausing and being like, a granola bar is an A right now. Like we have to stop grading ourselves assuming we fail no matter what effort we make. So I think that marble piece is such a beautiful way to just honor that. I talk about it as like 1%. Like if you're trying to go for 100 right away, you're not going to get it. So like, what is that 1% today? And how do you celebrate the fact that that was not easy for you and you did it? Okay. Next layer to this that I'm thinking about is, so I've kind of been teetering more along my experience within the eating disorder side. We think about sort of diet mentality, but we know this extends to everybody. Like everybody has some sort of painful relationship with their body at some point, whether it's transient, long-term, whatever. But I also think about, like you mentioned, you were a collegiate athlete. I think about like transitions in life, so we think of like big ones, maybe like menopause or something, but like, I mean, you went from like a very different lifestyle to then when you were done playing sports, like those feel like very dramatic times where learning to trust your body or listen to your body would be really difficult. So one, did you struggle with that as you had different aspects of your identity? Two, how do we reframe that when we think about, again, like you're going to have to relearn how to trust and engage with your body over time, especially when you have major lifestyle changes or things happen to you.
Yeah, that was a big struggle and played a big role in me getting into this work, actually. A lot of my clients are former athletes,
Mhm.
and I feel like, and maybe this is better in like D1 schools where sports are kind of taken more seriously, but I was completely unprepared for what it would be like to go from competing, having a competition season, being on the off season, still practicing, 5 times a week,
Right.
6 times a week, to like, I didn't know how to take care of my body at all. I had no education on like nutrition. The only thing I knew was that we carb loaded before competition.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, well, carbs give us energy.
Yeah.
Great. Got that much. Like that's pretty much all. I was like, I know fruits and vegetables are good for you. And it was like my own confusion, lack of information, lack of education, and like identity crisis that created this trajectory for me.
Mm.
So I definitely think that it is something that needs to be talked about more, not just transitioning out of athletics, but like any big change where you are getting a new job or
Mhm.
I mean, I'm thinking of the things people already don't think about. Like we think about having kids, we
Right.
think about, as you mentioned, menopause, maybe getting married, but like job changes where you're working a different schedule, huge.
Mhm.
A move, especially if it's like to a different time zone, huge.
Mhm.
Um, our bodies are, generally speaking, I would say most of our bodies are very, very resilient, but also kind of sensitive.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is that like they will adapt, but they're impacted by a lot of things. So, for example, there are people who will be like, oh, I only traveled like one time zone and I can't sleep at all
Right.
now. Right. And like, because you're sensitive, but like you'll adapt to it.
Right.
A lot of things impact our bodies in that way. And we don't know that because no one tells us that. We
Mm.
don't know that our bodies change a lot throughout our lives and are allowed to change a lot, regardless of whether we're making a baby. No one tells us that.
Right.
So people are like, in their 30s, 40s, 50s with clothes from high school and college hanging in their closet, wondering why, like feeling like they're supposed to fit.
Yeah.
And like, sorry, but you're not 16
Right.
anymore. You're not 22 anymore. Like, that would be really weird if you could wear all of those same
If your body
clothes.
looked the
Like,
same as you did when you were 16, like,
that
yeah.
would be really
Yeah.
weird. And like, we know that our faces
Yeah.
change. We know that like we start to get wrinkles and things start to sag and like hair starts
Yeah.
growing in weird places and falling out in weird places. But like, why would the rest of our body not be impacted?
Yeah. I mean, I love that, and I love just sort of thinking about so I never obviously played D1 or D3 or any other D visions. I was like, "Wait, D stands for division, so I can't say D divisions," but you get the point. But I do know one of the people that was in my master's program with me and went on to get her PhD, her whole focus was working with athletes, and particularly athletes when they finished collegiate
Mhm.
sports, because they're like, what do I do now? And so it's not just their bodies. It's like, if we think about people that like have gone to the NBA or the NFL or the WNBA, like the lack of education around money and like what happens when suddenly that, they're not doing those things anymore and their income changes. And so we know that when you're given a structure, an externally enforced structure, if you work out here, you do these things, but you're not really developing the buy-in or the connection to it, which why would you? Because you were likely overscheduled and not getting as much time as you needed to do all the things. Like you weren't even able to pause long enough to be like, why? And what am I doing? And what is my body requiring? And if I'm working out at this level, and what does my body require at these different emotional states and whatever? And then you're just sort of done. And now you've lost this big part of your identity and your body is changing. I think about the pandemic for many people, like nobody was
Mhm.
really as aware of what could happen until collectively everybody's relationship with their body changed. And
Yeah.
just kind of seeing that, I think about as people are listening to this notion of, again, intuitive eating or the idea of trusting your body and your body trusting
Yes.
you. Like that's really what I think a lot about. And I would talk about this with clients all the time is like, you've basically, like, if we go back to your example of like somebody waving and yelling at you and you're not listening, it's like your body doesn't trust you anymore. And that's why
Mhm.
you go through these like cycles of binging and then you restrict again. And like the minute you give it food, it's like, well, fuck, I don't know when she's going to give this to me again. I'm going to just get all of this and like store this in the best way I can to have the energy long term because your body is preparing to live in basically a trauma state at all points in
Mhm.
time. And so as you're going through this, I think the other thing is, in addition to having to deal with some of that psychological stuff you mentioned, like the fat phobia, our biases, I think there's also a willingness to realize as you're putting the marbles in the jar, it might feel uncomfortable. Not just the
Mhm.
like, I paused and took 15 minutes off, and what are people thinking of me? And I'm afraid of judgment, but also as you're starting to take care of your body in different ways, it needs some time to adjust to that. Like, even if that's the quote unquote healthy option to eat a meal instead of skipping it or to go for a walk, you've also conditioned it to have to function without doing that. You need to give it some time to adjust to that too. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah,
like thinking about that. And so
totally.
I'm curious as we're wrapping up. Again, you gave us this marble example, and I love that. I also think we've hit on all these different layers for people. How do they do that marble work and then tolerate the distress around that? Or kind of do like, what's the inner piece we could give them to go along with the marbles to help with that processing, that pain that's going to come up as they naturally would make those shifts?
Mm. Yeah, I think this is like not my best analogy, but I think about like your first, if anyone is listening who's ever had trust broken with a significant other who you really trusted,
Hmm.
I think about the first relationship after that. And like, it's
Mm,
really, really scary because the last time you trusted someone,
yeah.
they betrayed you. And so it's just like, I mean, it really comes back to almost the 1%, or even just thinking about like putting one foot in front of the other and trying to remind yourself that A, we can't control the outcome.
Hmm.
B, we aren't happy where we are. So what is there to lose?
I like that.
Like,
I like that a lot.
and this is what I would tell myself when I was dating
Hmm.
after I was cheated on. It was like, I don't have that guy anymore. He gone.
Yeah.
I am by
Right.
myself. So like I'm cool and content by myself. I had to get to that place too. That's a whole other conversation. And if this doesn't work out,
Yeah.
it's okay because I'm fine where I am.
Yep.
And like if you're not fine where you are, which for a lot of people doing this work they're
Right.
not. Like what do you have to lose? Like either, and I've had clients actually say this when they're talking about like being on the fence about working with me, is
Hmm.
like they ultimately had to kind of get to that place where they were like, okay, the worst thing that's going to happen is I stay right where I
Yeah.
am.
That I'm
The
annoyed that I
worst,
wasted time and money and energy, but like I'm right here.
right. It's like, I'm not going to be in a worse place than I
Yep.
am now.
Yep.
So I have to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. I have to trust the process. I have to remind myself that uncomfortable does not mean unsafe. And
Hmm.
I have to just keep putting in the reps, so to
Yeah.
speak, right? Like it's the same at a new, I think about a new job. Like everything feels overwhelming. You don't know how the POS
Yeah.
works. You don't know where the things are. You don't know
Yeah.
anything. And you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna get fired on my first day. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, it's just new.
Yeah.
It's just new.
Yeah.
And if you do get fired on the first day, you can go find a different job.
Yeah.
Again, like you're not gonna be in the worst place.
Right. Right. I love that. And I think that mindset too of like, we're not asking people to suddenly have the most like, everything is amazing. It's going to be wonderful. I love this journey. We're saying, no, this is going to be really fucking hard because you've spent your whole life telling yourself that you don't deserve or don't get to tell yourself that you are worthy as you are. You make it contingent upon all of these things, all of these content points of this degree, this, whatever. And then if we include in that lens that we're again just sort of saying is over here and it really needs like its own 10-hour episode, if we talk about systems of oppression, that's layered into it where you're like, well, I have to make up for all of these deficiencies that the world has told me I'm broken, I'm a problem because of these aspects of my identity that now you perceive as negative. So if you spent your whole life doing that, it's going to be really hard to let go of that because you think you're protecting yourself. You think you're doing the right things. And reframing that, I think, is so key and so powerful.
One other thing that I just thought of as like a good reminder for what you just said, where it's like, oh my God, I've been doing it wrong the whole time, is the Maya Angelou quote of like, when we know better, we can do better.
Ooh,
you literally cannot do better until you know better. So like,
yes,
release it. If you didn't know, how could you do?
Yes. Yeah. Stop shitting on yourself because you know something now. You're like, oh, I wish I would have done this. Why didn't I do this? Because you didn't know. And how do you love the you that did the best it could in that moment, and then love the you now that's saying, and I want to try something different. And then love the you maybe in a week that's like, fuck, I'm falling on my face and this is really hard and I still don't know how to do it and I feel like I'm failing. Like it's that integration piece. As we're talking and I'm like, how in the world has it been 51 minutes?
I have no idea.
And I feel like we're only in the intro still. So I'm like, well, here we are, everybody. I hope you got what you needed. I am not satiated yet. I feel like there needs to be more of this conversation at some point. And so know that you are welcome back any and all times. Cool. It is, again, it's what I felt is the vibe. Like there's just a vibe. We said it before we started recording. Our biggest problem was going to be that I think we could talk a very long time. Yes. And so just to recap for everyone, the marbles. Think about the marbles. Think about how you can put one in, be okay when you take one out. Stop putting yourself in that position where you feel like, okay, I've got to constantly be perfect. I've got to do it all right away. And how do you give yourself that love and grace and space to keep showing up and trying to put that next step forward and really thinking about what the long-term plan can be instead of those short-term fixes. Okay, last piece before we sign off. Where is the best place for all the people that are like, yeah, I am not satiated either. I need more Lara in my life. Where do they go?
Instagram is my place of choice, my social media of choice. It's super easy. It's just my first name dot my last name, LARA.DAYS.
You'll love it.
Find me there. I check all my message requests. I love talking to people. So come connect with me.
I love it. Okay. I will make sure that is in the show notes. I'm also, don't worry, everybody. I'm going to make sure that Lara gets back on this podcast at some time because we have so much more we need to learn from and just geek out over as we're talking about maybe not even food, maybe not even systems of oppression, but something. Maybe it's the sports conversation next time.
Yeah.
So there we go.
I'm down for all of it.
Or, it'll be great. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, listeners. Remember, this is a lot. Your brain is probably bouncing all over the place. When you turn this off, just take a moment, take a breath, take one thing from today. Even if it's not the stuff we pointed out, just one small thing. You can always come back and listen again. And when you're ready to dive in deeper, you've got connection points to reach out to Lara in the future as well. Otherwise, I will see you back here next Sunday.